Hello, welcome. My name's Steve Sexton, and this is the Silver-Haired Tsunami Show. With over 100 million people in the United States over age of 50, that demographic is going to have a profound effect on economics for decades to come, whether it be travel, health, finances, real estate. The Silver-Haired Tsunami Show is all about educating people, getting them the information they need to know in order to manage the changing tides of retirement. On today's show, it's all about real estate transitions. You know what? There's a large number of people in California are looking to move out of California. Why? Because they're house rich, cash poor. So they're looking to find another location that they could move to that will have a lower cost of living so they can do all the wonderful things that they want in retirement. On top of that, we have people who are a little bit older and health reasons are causing them to move out of their homes, in which case they move into things like a transitional living facility, and they have tax issues, income issues. And then we have those people that love real estate. They've been rental owners for decades, and the problem is after 1,125 visits to Home Depot and always having somebody break the toilets when they're looking to have a vacation, they want to get out of those rental properties. You know what? This is a wonderful show. You want to stay tuned. Be right back. I'm going to give you my 3 money-saving, time-critical steps that you need to take for selling any real estate. We'll see you in a moment. The tip of the day, 3 time and critical money-saving steps that you want to take before selling any real estate, because the reality is you want to sell it on your terms and you want it in your best interest. First, you want to determine how the sale of the property will affect your taxes, not only now, but in the future. Well, you need to implement a plan to lower or eliminate those taxes. 2, you want to determine through analysis if you're using your income sources correctly. Why? Because you want to make sure the proceeds of that sale of that property will be in your best interest and be able to fund what you need to fund in the future. And 3, you want to understand your risk exposure, because you know what? When you're selling your highest value asset, it's pretty anxious and it's a big decision. And if you're going to invest some of those proceeds to go in, maybe fund your grandson's education or your trip or your incapacity, you want to be comfortable about the investments that you place them in. By doing so, you'll know how the sale of that house will affect your future and be able to make it with peace of mind. More or less, these 3 steps enable you to get your financial house in order before selling your physical house. The first person that we have here is Shannon Keatley of the Alliance Group. She's going to teach us how to make sure our money isn't falling through the cracks when we sell our real estate.
Hi, I am Bob Schuster. This is Arlene Schuster. We live in Escondido, California, and we chose Baker Electric Solar to install our solar system at our home.
We've known the Baker family for many years. We're both pioneer families here in Escondido. We chose them because of the integrity of their family.
They were first class. We know what good service means to the customer. Baker Electric is the epitome of that good service.
It's the best experience we could have ever had. We're very pleased.
Welcome back. You know what? When you're selling your real estate, it's really important that you find the right agent. Somebody who has the experience, background, and does a volume of transactions on an annual basis so they know what to look for, how to market your property, and more importantly, how to get top dollar. Today we have Shannon Keatley of the Alliance Group. They're one of the top 1% of all realtors across the country. They're very well respected, and they've got this wonderful process that I've brought Shannon here. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me today.
So what do you have for us today?
One of the biggest things that we wanted to discuss today was about preparing the property for market. So many people come in and don't realize how important that is to save money and save time as you're going through the transaction. What it is when I talk about preparing the property, I'm talking about staging and doing pre-inspections of the property before it goes onto the marketplace. And why that's so important is that you want the property to show through the buyer's eyes. You know, we have so many of our clients through the Silver-Haired Tsunami that have had these properties for generations that they no longer see what the property really truly looks like. And so when we come in there for fresh eyes and what eyes that the buyers are going to be looking through. And so what that means is really properly looking at the property, staging it, and seeing little things that we can do up front for the property. And sometimes that means moving around furniture Sometimes that means landscaping when we're talking about that. And sometimes it means decluttering property and really taking the emphasis out of what we feel is important as far as our family photos and everything, and really kind of making sure that it goes to the masses.
So what you're saying is if I have a picture of Michael Jordan up on the wall, it might not work for the age demographic that would come in and want to buy the house. And at the same token, we've got all the knitting and all that kind of stuff. Or, you know what, somebody's got a wonderful English garden, but most of the people that move in that area don't want an English garden.
That's right. That's it exactly. Or it also with the Michael Jordan posters, you want you want people to look at the house rather than the pictures or the memories that are in there.
Now talk a little bit about pre-inspection, because I understand this is really important.
This too is a really important thing when you're thinking about the right things to do to the property before putting it on the market, because you want to know problems that could come up down the road on the property. And doing pre-inspections, and again, a lot of our clients have owned the properties for years and years and years and aren't even aware of items that could potentially be problematic in plumbing, electrical, in the roofing, or anything else. If we do pre-inspections ahead of time, Steve, what that does is it puts our sellers in the best negotiating position possible, that they know that these items could be a problem down the road for any buyers doing inspections later on, and it puts our sellers in the driver's seat of being able to clarify and do any of the items that need to be repaired or addressed ahead of time, rather than having the buyer come in with their inspector and maybe, you know, a plumbing problem or something that could cost our seller up front $200 now becomes a $1,500 problem.
I was just going to say, I had one of our clients of our firm, she just sold a property and she didn't go through that process of having it pre-inspected, and it was just a small little termite thing, but they wanted $5,000 off just from that, and it was just a few $100s to fix, and they wanted it fixed afterwards, not during, because they wanted the $5,000. So basically, because they didn't have the right realtor and they didn't understand the pre-inspection, and the other thing is they didn't understand the impact of, hey, I spent $400 up front, but it could have saved me thousands on the back end.
That's exactly it, where those little problems that are a few $100s will save you, sometimes we've seen tens of thousands of dollars on the back end, because buyers perceive it as maybe even a bigger problem than what it truly is.
Oh yeah, and if they've got a good realtor on their side, they know how to negotiate for it. But what you're really saying here is, if I position this in a facet where the buyer who comes in really wants it, and there's no real issues with it that anybody can find, I'm going to sell it for whatever they ask for it or whatever they offer me and I accept, which puts me in a better position all the way through.
That's exactly it, Stephen. That's exactly, and it saves the clients, again, money that could fall through the cracks if they're not aware of that.
Now, you have an example for us today.
Yes, here's one of our examples when we're talking about staging and how important it is to look for things that might alter a perspective of a buyer when they're looking at it. And so many times it's curb appeal that's so important, because really that's the first impression that the buyers have of the property. They pull up to it and say, okay, is this someplace that I can see myself living? Or is it sometimes they say, oh man, there's too much problems here that we need to address?
You know what's funny? The first time Laura and I bought a house, the realtor who took us around, he goes, if you don't like it, we're moving on. And there's a few of them, we're like, nah.
Yeah, you could just drive by real quickly and know that. And that's one of the examples that we have here that we're going to show is really preparing the property. And then we have the before pictures of showing the property in its perspective of how it was, how it needed more curb appeal with it. It had bushes and trees and everything up that you can see right there. And then the pictures of the inside were very drab, kind of dark with everything else. And then the after photo that we have is just amazing, because you can't even believe it's the same property. It looks so different.
That's night and day.
It is night and day. Where now you can see, because of afterwards, we took out some bushes and trees and everything out front. Now you can actually see the property has life to it.
You know what? You see those open beams in that living room area?
Yeah.
In the first picture, you didn't even pay attention to that. You just saw those dark, empty floors, and then you look at that, you see that couch, that fireplace, and say, hey, I could be here.
Exactly. Now you can really imagine yourself in there entertaining people with everything. And that's what it is, too, is that so many properties are looked at ahead of time online first, before even buyers contact real estate agents. So you have a split second in which to catch their attention. If you can't do that, and again, it's the whole pre-inspection, pre-staging, pre-looking at the property and seeing what it's going to look like when it goes to market and what the buyers are looking for. And just a real quick note in this example is that this property was actually on the market a couple of times with a few different realtors, not looking at it from this perspective. What they did before, it was listed on the market for over 260 days.
Oh, wow.
And the highest offer that they received
Hold on, it was on the market for 9 months?
Yes, 9 months total.
Oh my gosh.
The highest offer that they received at that time, Steve, was $820,000, and it was from an investor trying to lower the price, trying to get them in, trying to get in at a good price so they were able to do the things that we suggested that the seller do. Glenn and I came in. We suggested that they do a few things. I think it ended up costing them about $14,000 roughly in repairs of doing the front and doing the staging of the property, bringing in some furniture so it could highlight the fireplace and the flooring and the rural wood accents that you saw in the picture. And then we were able to get a property or an offer on the property within 17 days at $880,000.
17 days, $860,000 more.
$60 for a
Okay.
$14,000 investment. So it shows you by looking at it through different eyes and really preparing the property of what can be done.
Well, that's really just having the right agent. You guys did a wonderful job.
No, thank you.
Shannon, thank you for being here. You know what? What is the special thing? You do this for every client. You have the stager, you have the appraiser go out there so somebody can really see exactly what they're looking at and determine, hey, this is what I need to do in order to sell my property at a reasonable rate.
Yeah. What Glenn and I do is we do a no cost, no obligation assessment. And when we come in and so we, it might take us a half hour, we go through the property, have you walk us through that. Have you walk us through the property, and Glenn takes copious notes on things that we're talking about and things that we recommend that we do to the property, or at least look at. Some things that could be, and sometimes it's just as easy as rearranging furniture, and sometimes it's just as much as, going in there doing landscaping and everything else. But Glenn and I do this, and like we said, it's no cost, no obligation. It's a free consultation that we do for everyone to be able to see how they are able to get the most and the top dollar out of their property for the least amount of hassle.
That's great. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks, Steve, for having me.
Now, if you would like to get more information on Glenn and Shannon at the Alliance Group and how that staging piece works, you can go to the Silver-Haired Tsunami website. Next, we have Bill Exeter. He's going to help us lower or eliminate taxes when it comes to selling our property. Stick with us. We'll be back in a moment.
My name's Kevin Grangetto. I live in Escondido, California, and I had my system put in by Baker Electric Solar. When they got here, they were ready to go. Started early, 6 in the morning. They parked off site, so they were able to get everything in on the roof, hooked up, and done in a matter of 3 days. And it was really easy for my wife and I to work with them. You just don't want a lot of these challenges to be, affecting the way that you do your life. And when they got in and out of here, it was excellent. It was easy. It's just the way they told me it would be.
You found out how much the house is worth, how much you're going to sell it for, and now you know your tax liability. The next step is, how do we lower or eliminate the taxes on the sale of the property so we can use that money for what we want? And for that reason, we have Bill Exeter here. Bill runs the Exeter 1031 Exchange Group. You know what a lot of people don't know about Bill is he's a lobbyist. He's one of the top 1031 exchange experts in the country. So when things get all messed up, they call Bill. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be back on. Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you for being here. One of the biggest things that people just don't understand what a 1031 exchange is. It's actually a tax code, right?
It is, absolutely.
So tell us how that works.
Well, it's Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code, and it's really designed to allow an investor to sell real estate and defer the payment of all their taxes if they reinvest through a 1031 exchange transaction. So it's really a tax deferral strategy to help them keep all that money in their pocket working for them.
So one of the big things that I see is a lot of people have misconceptions about how this whole 1031 exchange works. They think if they buy one house, they have to buy the exact same house or exchange it into another house. Is that correct?
That's true. A lot of misconceptions, myths out there, a lot of stuff on the internet that's incorrect. So it really boils down to two important concepts. One is qualified use. We want to make sure that all the properties they're selling, all the properties they're buying, are held for rental, investment, or business use. And the second is like-kind property, and that's where there's lots of misinformation. And they'll still think if you sell a condo, you have to buy a condo. It's completely false. Any kind of real estate qualifies as like-kind property as long as you meet that rental, investment, or business use requirement.
So what you're saying is I could sell my apartment building and go buy raw land as long as I'm going to use it for rental.
Absolutely.
So when this happened with one of my clients, they actually sold a 4-unit apartment complex and then bought farmland in Kansas and rented it out.
Exactly. So even office, retail, industrial, Delaware statutory trusts, water rights, air rights, mineral rights, lots of different type of assets that people wouldn't think are considered to be real estate will qualify.
Well, here's one question I have, and I got this from a client, and I just have to ask. he's selling a property, okay, a rental property, but he also wants to buy a charter boat that he can rent out. Can he do something like that?
Good question. No, unfortunately not. He's selling real estate. He has to buy real estate. Now, if he can permanently attach that boat to the dirt and it becomes real estate, it would qualify.
Okay. You know, I get those questions from time to time. People hear wild stuff, so you just got to dispel it all. Now, the next thing is, hey, tell us, we have a lot of people in this area and other parts of the United States. They're looking to move out of their primary residences. And you know what? They have the 121 exclusion. That's that $500,000 exclusion if you're married, okay? But like my folks, they bought a house for $34,000. It's worth over $1 million. They've got the exclusion on $500, but they're going to have to pay taxes on another $500.
Absolutely.
Now, is there strategies people can use a 1031 exchange for in order to help them eliminate taxes in this scenario?
There are strategies, and they're not well known. A lot of the accounting and tax professionals out there are not aware of it. But there's an IRS ruling that actually allows the couple to move out of the house, convert the house to rental property. So we probably recommend renting it for, say, 24 months, long enough to show they had the intent to rent. And that's the key. And then after that 24-month rental period, they can actually sell the property, and they still qualify for the $500,000 tax-free exclusion. And they could do a 1031 exchange and defer the rest of the tax into rental property. It's really a win-win scenario.
Well, you know what? I actually had a client of mine ask me to ask you this on air. So here's the scenario. See, they live in Point Loma. They have a guest house. That's about half of what it's about 1,700 square feet. They've got a primary residence. It's about 4,000. If they rent out that guest house, okay, which works out to about a third of the property, will they be able to 1031 exchange that portion, so to speak? So if it's worth $1.5 million, they'll be able to 1031 exchange, say $500,000. They'll get $500,000 on the 121 exchange because they own the other property for more than 2 years, and then they'll have to pay tax on the balance of it.
Yes, absolutely. So it's what we refer to as split-use property. So part of the property is held as a primary residence. The other part is rental property. They typically allocate everything by acreage or square footage or something like that. So in this case, if it's 1/3, 2/3, 2/3 would be applied as a primary residence. 1/3 would be applied as investment property and qualify for 1031 exchange treatment.
Okay, and in the same case, we also have people that, hey, I've rented out the bottom floor of my house, and I've got half my house rented, and they're able to, you know, as long as they 1031, they've got half of it that they can 1031 into a Delaware statutory property, a Delaware rental property, and still get the exclusion on the portion of the property that they were living in.
Yes, absolutely. And if it's one structure, they can actually apply the $500,000 tax-free exclusion to the entire property. So if their gain is $500,000 or less, I would just go with the 121 exclusion and get it tax-free. If the gain's over $500,000, then again, they can allocate based on square footage. So if the upstairs is rental, the downstairs is a primary. If it's 50-50, then half the gain would be tax-free under the 121 exclusion. The other half could be deferred through a 1031 exchange.
Okay, now you got to be really clear on helping our viewers understand the time periods that they have, because everybody messes that up.
True, yep. So if you're doing a 1031 exchange, when you sell your property, the day it closes, you're going to have 45 days to identify something to replace it with, so whatever your target property is, and a total of 180 days to actually complete your exchange. So it's 45 plus an additional 135 days for a total of 180.
Okay, in the 45 days, the big question I have is, how many properties can you identify?
There's a number of different ways to identify property. Most people use the 3-property rule, so they can identify up to 3. There is a second rule where they can identify more than that if they want to buy a bunch of smaller assets. In that case, they can identify up to 200% of the value that they sold. So if they sold for $1 million, they could identify up to $2 million in value of replacement properties.
But they might not close on all those, and they might just close on the one that they need to close on.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you know what, when it comes to vacation properties and second homes, how does 1031 exchange work?
The vacation properties and second homes kind of fall into almost a black hole in a sense. They're not a primary residence, so they don't qualify for the 121 exclusion. They may qualify for 1031 exchange treatment, depending on how much rental activity is involved. So there's a ruling where they can rent it for at least 2 weeks per year and keep their personal use to not more than 2 weeks, and then it would qualify for exchange treatment. They could also just stop all personal use, rent it out as long as they can, and then sell and qualify for 1031 exchange treatment. So there's some flexibility there if we sit down and do some proactive planning.
Bill, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
I'm glad to have you. Hey, look, if you're thinking about a 1031 exchange and you'd like to get information, go to the Silver-Haired Tsunami website. Look for Bill Exeter's picture and look for the download of his guide to 1031 exchanges.
Hi, my name is Min Lee. I live up in Carmel Valley, northern San Diego with my 2 kids and wife, and we had our solar installed by Baker Electric Solar. We went with solar because we wanted to be environmentally sound, but ultimately it came down to being financially sensible, and the prepaid lease was really the best option. There was only one payment up front, lock in all of our utility rates. We'll get our return back in about 6 or 7 years, kind of like a bond or a CD. We had no headaches, no stress to worry about. If you're thinking about going solar, now's a great time. Our electric bill is 0, and you can't beat that.
Hello, welcome back. You know what? We just finished talking with Shannon Keatley of the Alliance Group. We found out how to not have your money fall through the cracks when you're selling your real estate. And then we talked about with Bill Exeter about how to reduce or eliminate taxation when you're transitioning out your real estate. Now, one of the things I do want to say, there's many other strategies you could utilize, whether it be conservation easements, there's oil and gas contracts, there's deferred sales trusts, there's a lot of them. You want to take a look at those. But one of the big things that people do after they figured out the taxes is, how do I create the income that I need to derive from the proceeds of the sale? That's why we have Don Meredith. He's the president of Tactical Income. Don, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Now, one of the biggest things when people have when they sell their real estate, they've taken care of the taxes. Now what they're looking to do is fund grandkids' college, their bucket list tours, trips, travel. And you know what? Maybe it's just in case they have that long-term care need, they have the income that they need to do that. But the reality is, hey, they're concerned about those investments. They're uneasy about them, and they need to get some education. That's why you're here. Again, thanks for being here. Tell us about some of the options that people have when they do a 1031 exchange. What are the options that they have other than going to another real estate property?
Well, that's exactly it, Steve, is that not too many years ago, if you accumulated income real estate and you now wanted to exit it, what do? You just have one option. You pay capital gains, or you sell a property and buy another property, which doesn't really alleviate that issue. You're still managing, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, the baby boomers are rapidly aging, and we see all this population with rental property, and they want to get out of it, or at least some of it. Some of it they might enjoy. Others may have had a few too many trips to Home Depot. Oh, yeah. Not so much fun anymore.
Talked about that.
So they're looking at DSTs is an exit strategy.
What's a DST?
It's a Delaware statutory trust, and it's sponsored by some of the great real estate companies in this country. And it's simply a trust that they put real estate in. It is totally acceptable by IRS standards. In 2004, the IRS created language specifically for the DST as a 1031 exchange. And the average investor, you have to be accredited, and there's accredited guidelines to follow, risk guidelines. But this is a wonderful option to consider to get
what kind of property goes? What kind of properties or real estate properties go inside a Delaware statutory trust?
Well, these are institutional grade properties, Steve. So we've seen ESPN studios in Bristol, Connecticut.
Okay.
We've seen packages of CVS, corporate leases, great tenants, long leases. We've seen big multifamily properties, 200-300 unit, and by great institutional real estate companies.
So what type of income could somebody realize out of these type of properties, or the DST?
You know, it varies, but you're looking in the 5-6% range, even a little better, and that's net to the investor. There's expenses and so forth in these DSTs, but net right now, as of this, airing, you're looking at about 6%, a little better.
Now, my understanding is those incomes are inflation adjusted. Is that correct?
That's right. That's the first year cash flow. You have all the tax advantages of real estate.
So they're going to get depreciation again?
You reset the clock on depreciation. A lot of investors out there have used up their depreciation.
Okay. Now I want to switch gears on you, and I know you brought a slide, but here's the big question I have. You know what? Some people they don't have to pay the taxes on it. They might be living in their primary residence and they're selling it, and they're within that $500,000. where can they invest without going into a DST, but might have a little bit more liquidity than something like that?
Well, you know, we have to almost look through a different lens these days. You know, we had a psychologist on the radio show the other day who said people are still suffering from PTSD
Okay.
from 2008. And so what that means to us is people are still gun shy about the market. And if you saw the movie The Big Short, that didn't help. You wonder, you know, if Wall Street is totally working against you, these big hedge funds, you choose a stock or a mutual fund only to feel like they're selling it off on you as soon as you make that choice. When you turn your portfolio into income, it slows down that process. It cushions the process. It's harder for Wall Street to get on the other side of that. What I mean by that is when you buy real estate, and you can buy it as a stock, Steve, but the problem is if the stock market sells off, it starts to act less like real estate and more like a stock. So there's real estate trusts out there that you can get in the accumulation phase. They don't trade. It's illiquid. And that makes some people nervous, but it's the illiquidity that makes these a great investment. What I mean by that is if it's too liquid, it causes us to, and institutions to liquidate.
Okay.
Causes volatility. Real estate trusts, there's some great properties. You find trusts that have Boeing, Roar, great
So very
property.
established companies
Very
that aren't
established
going anywhere.
companies, right.
And they're paying rent to you.
They're paying rent to the trust, which is its own corporation. And it's because it's not liquid, you know, you have to do financial planning around this. But if you take a small bit of your portfolio that's income producing in that trust, give it a job to do, let it pay a mortgage, let it pay long-term care. The more you turn your portfolio into income, the less volatility you have and the less you have to worry about the ups and downs and these big swings in the stock market.
So what you're saying is the more you turn it into income, somebody's going to have more stability with that income and therefore have less, you know, sleep well at night, so to speak.
Well, absolutely. You know, I ran into somebody last week, they're 67 years old, and he said, hey, I lost 35% of my portfolio in January in the big downturn in the market.
In 08, yeah.
I ran into a doctor who said, I've been in cash since 08. I am just terrified of the market. Two extremes, right, Steve? So if you just start to turn that portfolio into income, add some real estate. They call this the alternative space. However, if you look at the Yale Endowment Fund, that is almost all the alternative space, only 7% in equities. What they're doing is they're getting things that are less correlated to the stock market in that endowment fund, and I recommend people do the same thing. It allows you to sleep well, Steve, and you don't have to worry about the volatility quite so much.
Thanks for joining us today, Don. It was great.
Always great to be here, Steve.
If you'd like to get more information on anything you heard on the show today, go to the Silver-Haired Tsunami website. Now, coming in the future, we have a wonderful show coming up next week. But remember, if you follow those 3 steps, you'll get your financial house in order before you sell your physical house. That way, when you make that transition, you'll do it with peace of mind, and that's more about sleeping well at night. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.